Shark culling and overfishing worsening climate change. Kim Landers, while New South Wales grapples with how to reduce the number of shark attacks, new research has found that the predators play an important role in preventing changes to the climate. But the study, which has been published in the journal Nature Climate Change, also warns that overfishing and culling sharks is resulting in more carbon being released from the seafloor, contributing to climate change. Australian Research Council fellow Dr. Peter McGreedy from Deakin University is the lead researcher, and he's speaking here to Sarah Sedghi. Peter McGreedy, when we try and tackle the issue of climate change, one thing is to reduce the number of carbon and fossil fuels we burn. But the other part of dealing with climate change is to get rid of carbon that's already been released into the atmosphere and to lock it away in the ground. And there's a natural process for doing that, and it's called biosequestration, and it's the same process that created fossil fuels in the first place. Now, several years ago we discovered that there are these ecosystems in our marine environment called blue carbon ecosystems. They are the seagrasses, the salt marshes, the mangroves, and they're among the most powerful carbon sinks in the world. So they will capture and store carbon at a rate 40 times faster than tropical rainforests like the Amazon, and they'll store that carbon in the ground for millennial time scales. Now, in understanding these systems and this wonderful thing they're doing in helping to mitigate climate change and reset our planet's thermostat, we also discovered that they're under increasing degradation. And there are many forms of degradation that are affecting these blue carbon ecosystems, but in several instances we've seen that there were just a lot of animals in these environments that were overabundant. Turtles, crabs, certain types of worms, stingrays. These animals that are overabundant to do with loss of predators used to keep their numbers in check. Sharks and other top predators. So there's been some 90% or loss of the ocean's top predators, and so we've learned this link between sharks and other top predators and the cascading effects they will have down to other animals in those ecosystems that are eating themselves out of house and home. They're eating the blue carbon ecosystems that have sequestered so much carbon, and this is causing release of ancient carbon as a consequence. Sarah Sedghi, so if there are less sharks, there are more turtles, for example, which will eat more vegetation and disturb sediment on the seafloor, which will then release more carbon into the atmosphere. Peter McGreedy, yes, and in one example we saw this is in Massachusetts in Cape Cod. There'd been overfishing in the region, so a lot of the big fish had been removed. And then what we saw was an increase, a remarkable increase, a huge increase, in the number of crabs that bury and burrow down in the system, in the salt marsh which sequestered all this carbon. And we'd found that in an area there the crabs had become so abundant that they had pretty much destroyed the salt marsh. And it was a small area, it was only 1.5 square kilometers, but it liberated 250,000 tons of carbon that had been stored in the ground. This carbon that has been accumulating over geological time scales and was otherwise locked away until it was exposed to these crabs. Sarah Sedghi, so in effect, sharks help prevent climate change? Peter McGreedy, sharks, believe it or not, are helping to prevent climate change. Sarah Sedghi, do you think more consideration needs to be given to shark culling and fishing? Peter McGreedy, yeah, we've only just scratched the surface here, and I think we're onto something very big here. These blue carbon ecosystems are so critical for sequestering carbon, and they support these important food webs, and when these food webs are disrupted, it's a bit like playing a game of Jenga. You pull out a few pins and the whole thing falls apart. Now, if we just lost 1% of the ocean's blue carbon ecosystems, it would be equivalent to releasing 460 million tons of carbon annually, which is about the equivalent of about 97 million cars. It's about the equivalent of Australia's annual greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's time to take a good look at the way in which nature helps mitigate climate change for us and trying to do everything we can to let that natural process operate in full force, and if sharks are a part of that, if predators and a part of that, we need to take that into consideration. Kim Landers, Dr. Peter McGreedy from Deakin University speaking to Sarah Sedgey.